every Friday evening outside Flinders Street Station to give our support to the courageous, visionary, award-winning Australian journalist Julian Assange. Julian Assange has never committed a crime. He is not guilty of any crime. 9 years ago, he was accused by the Swedish government of attacking 2 women, but that was clearly a setup so they could get him into Sweden and extradite him to the United States. Julian Assange was quite prepared to face his accusers in Sweden, but he first wanted a guarantee from the Swedish government that once he set foot in Sweden, he would not be extradited to the United States.
Yeah, fuck them.
The Swedish government failed to give Julian Assange that assurance, so it was clear that the Swedish government's claim of Julian Assange having sexually assaulted those women was just a cynical ploy to get Julian onto their shore so they could send him off to the United States. That is why...
And to destroy his reputation. Definitely.
That is why when the London government issued the extradition writ, Julian Assange realised he had no choice but to seek asylum. He sought asylum in the Ecuadorian embassy.
To save his
and
life.
Could not, from that day in 2012, set foot outside the Ecuadorian embassy without being arrested and sent straight off to Sweden. For that reason, Julian Assange's confinement to the Ecuadorian embassy was defined by United Nations Special Rapporteur on torture and imprisonment, Nils Melzer. It was defined as arbitrary, unjust imprisonment and torture. What happened to Julian Assange was clearly illegal, and Julian Assange, an Australian citizen, was entitled to support from the Australian government, which is supposed to look after the interests of every Australian citizen, whether in Australia or overseas. For 9 years, the Australian government has done nothing. They've looked the other way. They said almost nothing about Julian Assange. Occasionally they say something only to smear Julian Assange's name. They avoid the real issues behind the imprisonment of Julian Assange.
Free the truth. Free Assange.
We have to look at the case of Julian Assange in the broader historical context. Since 1945, United States, the government that wants to grab Julian Assange and take him back and try him in secret and throw him in jail for the rest of his life, that government has engaged in wars, many wars since 1945, in which many hundreds of thousands of people have been killed. Millions in the case of the Korean War and the Vietnam War. Wars the United States are involved include the Korean War, Vietnam War, wars against Iraq, Libya, Lebanon, Palestine, Yemen, and meddling in all countries in South America, overthrowing governments they don't like, including their attempt now to overthrow the Venezuelan government. The United States government doesn't want us to know the truth of what they have done and why they are trying to meddle in so many countries in the world. That is why they are so scared of effective news organisations such as the WikiLeaks run by Julian Assange. That
Founder of WikiLeaks.
They've concocted this, back in 2010 they concocted this fraudulent allegation that Julian Assange had assaulted these 2 women. That is why they wanted to, why they cooked up that accusation, which has since been dropped by the Swedish government. Today, Julian Assange is in prison in Belmarsh prison.
Hellhole.
He is confined to solitary confinement 23 hours a day, only let out for 1 hour a day in the early hours of the morning for exercise. He's not allowed to contact any other prisoners. Until recently, he was prevented from talking to anyone. Recently, he's been allowed, thankfully, to have contact with his wife and his 2 children. Nevertheless, the United States is still trying to get Julian Assange away from England, to be locked away in a secret dungeon for the rest of his life. If the Australian government had any backbone, the Australian government truly cared about Australian citizens, they could act tomorrow to get Julian Assange back. All it would take to end all this would be for Prime Minister Scott Morrison to ring up Boris Johnson and tell Boris Johnson straightly
and
that
Marie's
Australian
pain.
citizen Julian Assange is illegally being imprisoned and tortured and film-marked, and that Boris Johnson should release Julian
Shame,
Assange
Australia,
immediately.
shame.
If Boris Johnson refused to release Julian Assange, Australia has recourse. We could take the case to the United Nations, we could take the case to the International Criminal Court. That is what an Australian government that truly looks after the welfare of its citizens would do. Today we've seen very little action from this Australian government. We have to make sure that every member of Parliament who's been sitting in Parliament for the last 9 years has done nothing for Julian Assange. We've got to ask those people why they have chosen to do nothing for Julian Assange.
Because they want their
Fortunately, there is a handful
Free
of parliamentarians
Julian,
who are
yes.
standing up for Julian Assange.
Stand
We've
up.
got to find those politicians, vote for them. We've got to vote in the next election for any person who commits themselves to standing up for Julian Assange, and vote out all those that have done nothing for Julian Assange. Thank you.
Thank you.